The last time a creature weighing more than a ton walked across North America with no predator in the world to worry about, the continent was a place you wouldn't recognize, not even in your dreams. That was 66 million years ago. And what came after the asteroid? What grew out of the ashes of the dinosaurs was something so strange, so far outside any scale we deal with today, that calling it the dawn of the mammals is almost an insult to what actually happened. The Cenozoic was not the peaceful sunrise they paint for us. It was the most brutal piece of organized chaos this planet has ever produced in the wake of a mass extinction. And in that chaos, something decided to become enormous. Something decided to become lethal. And something in a corner nobody was watching decided to become intelligent. If you've ever wondered why the world looks the way it does, why the ecosystems work the way they work, why mammals dominate every continent and every niche you can imagine, the answer doesn't begin with us. It begins here, at the exact moment the planet fell empty and something had to fill it. And what filled it first was not what you'd expect. If real prehistory, without filters and without dumbing it down, is what you're here for, subscribe right now, because that is exactly why this channel exists. And stay until the end, because what comes in the final minutes will completely change the way you see the world around you. The Cretaceous ended with an impact so violent that the energy released was equivalent to billions of nuclear detonations going off at once. The sky sealed shut within days. Photosynthesis stopped. The food chains collapsed from the bottom up, like a building with its foundations pulled out from under it. 3/4 of every species on the planet stopped existing in an interval of time that, geologically speaking, was almost instantaneous. But what matters is not how the Cretaceous ended. What matters is what was left behind. What was left were the mammals. Small, nocturnal, specialized in eating whatever nobody else wanted. Insects, seeds, the occasional bit of carrion. Creatures that in the old world would have lived and died without anyone noticing, buried in the dark. While the dinosaurs set the rules of every ecosystem for 160 million years. But suddenly, on a planet emptied of everything that had ruled it for so long, those tiny mammals found themselves facing something with no equivalent in modern history, an entire planet with no owner. And nature does not tolerate a vacuum. What happened in the first 10 million years of the Paleocene, the first epoch of the Cenozoic, is one of the most frantic episodes of evolution the fossil record lets us observe. Mammals began to diversify at a speed that defies intuition. A study published in the journal Science in 2019, led by the evolutionary biologist Danielle Fraser, confirmed that mammals tripled their average body size within those first 10 million years. A lineage that used to take millions of years to produce a new form of life was suddenly producing several in the span of a few 100,000. In evolutionary terms, this was a real explosion, measured in fossils, in rock layers, in the visible acceleration of change. But here comes the first twist most documentaries leave out entirely. The first large mammals of the Cenozoic were not the ancestors of anything you know today. They were experiments. Forms of life the planet tried, perfected over millions of years, and then discarded without a second thought. The most representative group is called the condylarths, robust-bodied herbivores with generalist teeth, ranging in size from a large rabbit to a modern tapir, that filled the role of the big grazers with surprising efficiency for the time. They thrived. They dominated vast stretches of North America, Europe, and Asia for millions of years. And then they vanished forever without leaving a single living descendant you could find today. The Paleocene was full of stories like that. Whole lineages that won their niche, diversified, built complex ecosystems around themselves, and were then replaced by the planet with something more efficient. If you had visited North America 58 million years ago and come back 10 million years later, you would have found a completely different ecosystem, populated by creatures with no relation to the ones before. Not a continuation, a total replacement. And that instability was not an anomaly. It was the norm for the first 20 million years of the Cenozoic. And then came the Eocene, and with it, something paleontologists still study with a mix of fascination and disbelief: the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. Around 56 million years ago, in an interval extraordinarily short by geological standards, the planet's average temperature rose between 5 and 8 degrees Celsius. The oceans acidified, the ocean currents reorganized, and on land, tropical forests pushed all the way up to latitudes we associate today with cold climates. In what is now the Canadian Arctic, there were dense forests with palm trees and crocodiles. In Antarctica, trees grew. And in that extreme heat, mammals did something nobody would have predicted if it weren't written in the bones. They got smaller. The phenomenon is called thermal dwarfism, and it is one of the most unsettling patterns in the fossil archive. Smaller bodies shed heat more efficiently, and the fossils of the early Eocene show entire lineages that shrank by as much as 30% in body size over relatively few generations. A primitive horse the size of a medium dog became the size of a cat during that event. When temperatures moderated again, the size came back, the body responding to the planet's thermostat as if it had its own built-in adjustment mechanism. But the flip side of that heat was an explosion of biodiversity without precedent in the history of mammals. The Eocene is the moment modern mammals really start to appear, not as clumsy prototypes, but as recognizable forms with defined niches. The first cetaceans began their transition into the ocean in this period. Fossils from Pakistan and India show creatures like Pachycetus, a four-legged land mammal that spent time in the water, and Ambulocetus, which already swam with an efficiency its legs didn't quite suggest yet. In less than 15 million years, that lineage produced fully open ocean whales that never set foot on land again. If that doesn't strike you as extraordinary, consider what it means. 15 million years to turn a land mammal into a whale is, on the scale of life on this planet, an afternoon. But the Eocene had predators, and those predators deserve a moment. Because if you think the world of the dinosaurs was the only time the hunters operated on another scale, the Eocene has something to tell you. The Mesonychids were carnivorous mammals with hooves. An anatomical detail so baffling that when the first fossils turned up in the 19th century, paleontologists struggled to process what they were seeing. They roamed the Eocene forests as formidable predators, and then disappeared without leaving recognizable descendants. But they weren't the most disturbing. That title belongs to the Entelodonts. If you've never heard that name, this is the moment to learn it. The Entelodonts were distant relatives of modern pigs, and that alone is enough to give you pause. Some genera, like Daeodon of North America, reached 2 meters tall at the shoulder. The head was disproportionately huge, with bony knobs on the jaws and a set of teeth that paleontologists describe with a phrase that leaves no room for interpretation: built to crush bone. This was not an elegant hunter. It was a processing machine that ate everything it found: live prey, carrion, bones, roots. Fossils of other species found at the same sites show bite marks that match its jaws exactly. Bones completely crushed, not sliced or scraped like a cat would, but pulverized as if they'd been run through a press. Popular science nicknamed them the hell pigs, and no paleontologist has protested too loudly. The fossils speak for themselves. And here, when the land ecosystem of the Eocene already seems complicated enough, you have to look up because the sky wasn't a peaceful place either. Birds survived the asteroid, and in the Eocene, with the extinct pterosaurs gone, some of them decided to become enormous and lose the ability to fly. The gastornithids of Europe and North America stood nearly 2 meters tall, with beaks so robust that early studies classified them without hesitation as active predators of mammals. But more recent research has challenged that picture with serious anatomical arguments. The specific shape of the beak suggests a diet of tough vegetation and large seeds, not active hunting. Not predators, but vegetation processors that just happen to look like predators. And that raises a better question. If a 2-meter bird with that beak was not the apex predator, what was? In the early Eocene, the answer isn't simple, and that ambiguity is part of what makes the period so fascinating. Hit the like button if you have made it this far, because what comes now is the part most documentaries about the Cenozoic never include. The Middle and Late Eocene were the temperature peak of the entire era. And then, around 34 million years ago, the planet did something unexpected. It cooled fast and sustained, with consequences that reorganized every ecosystem on every continent. The mechanism was geographic. The Antarctic continent finished separating from South America, allowing the formation of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, an ocean current that wraps around the South Pole and thermally isolates it from the rest of the planet. Without that warm flow from the north, Antarctica began to freeze. The ice cap formed. The planet's reflectivity increased, accelerating the cooling in a feedback loop that climatologists consider one of the most significant cooling events of the Cenozoic. The tropical forests retreated toward the equator. In their place came more open, drier ecosystems with sharp seasons, the first grasslands. Landscapes that to an Eocene mammal would have felt almost as alien as the post-asteroid world felt to the mammals of the Cretaceous. And that change was another filter. The ones that could adapt thrived. The ones that couldn't disappeared. The condylarths that had survived the Paleocene finally went extinct. And out of that filter came one of the most extraordinary creatures the Cenozoic ever produced. In Asia, Paraceratherium thrived during the Oligocene and became something the books describe with numbers that at first look like typos. A relative of modern rhinoceroses, hornless with a disproportionately long neck and limbs, that raised it to a height no land mammal has reached before or since. Conservative estimates put it at 5 meters tall at the shoulder, and its weight is estimated between 15 and 20 tons in the most moderate models. It was the largest land mammal this planet has ever produced, and it held that title for millions of years, grazing the open woodlands of Oligocene Asia with a calm that only its sheer size could afford. The Oligocene was also when the modern carnivores began to take shape. The first canids, ancestors of every dog, wolf, and fox alive today, started diversifying in North America, while the first feliforms, the lineage that would eventually produce the cats and hyenas, settled into the Old World. But the last great act of transformation began with something nobody in the Oligocene could have anticipated: the rise of the grasses. Grasses existed before the Miocene, but around 23 million years ago, they spread in a way that transformed entire continents. And with the grasslands came a completely new evolutionary pressure. Grass contains microscopic mineral particles called phytoliths that grind down tooth enamel with brutal efficiency. The herbivores of the Eocene, with their low-crowned teeth adapted to soft leaves, simply could not eat grass for a whole lifetime without wearing their teeth down to nothing. The evolutionary answer was hypsodonty, high-crowned teeth with more material to spare before reaching the pulp. Horses are the best documented example of that transformation. In the early Eocene, they were dog-sized animals with low-crowned teeth. By the Miocene, their teeth had grown progressively taller, their bodies larger, their legs specialized for running on open ground. Over the course of 20 million years, the lineage that produced dog-sized animals was producing animals the size of a modern horse. And what makes that story so revealing is that it wasn't a straight line. The evolutionary tree of the horses in the Miocene was really a bush, with multiple diverging branches exploring different sizes and strategies. Most of them went extinct. Only one, the genus Equus, survived to the present. The story of the modern horse is not a story of steady progress toward perfection. It's the story of the single survivor of an experiment with dozens of failed attempts. And the predators answered that new abundance of grassland herbivores with a transformation of their own. The saber-toothed cats reached some of their most extreme forms in the Miocene and Pliocene. Smilodon of the Pleistocene is the most famous. But before it, in the Miocene, lineages like Machaerodus already roamed the savannas of the Old World, with canines that in the largest specimens reached 20 centimeters, measured along the curve. The exact function of those teeth has been one of the most persistent debates in vertebrate paleontology. For decades, it was assumed they punch through the throats of large prey with a high-precision technique. More recent biomechanical studies have complicated that picture. The jaws of many of these cats couldn't generate the bite force it would take to pierce the neck of a large herbivore. What they could do was open the mouth to angles impossible for a modern cat, which points to a different technique, probably aimed at tearing soft tissue rather than punching through bone. There's still no consensus, and that open question is one paleontologists keep working on with every new fossil that surfaces. 66 million years. That is what separates the asteroid impact from the present. In that time, the planet went from absolute emptiness to the diversity we know today, but not in a straight line. In a spiral, with setbacks, with secondary extinctions, with stretches of extreme heat and sudden cooling, with discarded experiments and forms of life that ruled for millions of years before vanishing without a trace. The condylarths of the Paleocene were the first to try. The entelodonts of the Eocene were the most disturbing to succeed. Paraceratherium of the Oligocene was the largest the planet ever allowed. And the saber-tooths of the Miocene were the most elegantly lethal thing evolution produced on land in that entire era. None of them are here today. What is here is us and the ecosystems around us, which are the direct result of that whole process. Every time you see a horse, you're looking at the single survivor of 20 million years of experimentation. Every time you see a cat, you're looking at the descendant of a lineage that replaced the saber-tooths after millions of years of coexistence. And every time you see a tropical forest, you're looking at the remnant of ecosystems that, in the Eocene, covered half the planet. The Cenozoic did not end. We are inside it. The Holocene, the epoch we live in, is the most recent slice of an era that began 66 million years ago, and still hasn't written its final chapter. If you made it this far, thank you, truly, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, because the story that just ended here is only half of what you need to know. The Pleistocene, the last great act before humans arrived, when the mammoths, the mastodons, and the giant ground sloths disappeared. In an interval of time we still can't fully explain, is a story for the next video. So tell me in the comments, out of all these creatures, which one would you least want to meet? I have my favorite, but I want to hear yours first.